So I'm going to talk about what makes up an ecosystem, all the different parts of an ecosystem. So one part of the ecosystem is the producers. These are what use the sunlight, photosynthesize, and produce glucose, which supports the whole food web. So all of the food web comes from the producers. The producers starts it all off. So even like if I'm taking, for example, let's take this pond. We got some pondweed, for example, that will feed the sardines. And the sardines get eaten by the tuna. But all of that energy that is flowing upwards has started from the producers. Now, you're going to learn this later on, but as you go up the energy levels, there are energies being lost. So you get less and less energy as you go along, but it all started with the producer. Without the producer, none of this would start. And also the producers have an other benefit. Photosynthesizing, which produces oxygen, converts the carbon dioxide, which us animals we don't need, into oxygen, which we do need for aerobic respiration. The other part is the consumers. Now, you've got different types of consumers. You've got primary consumers. So you start off with a producer. And as we discussed, the producer is what photosynthesizes, and this gets eaten by the primary consumer. Now, the primary consumer is a herbivore. It feeds on vegetation. And this then gets eaten by a secondary consumer. These could be carnivores, so they could just feed on the primary consumer, or they could be omnivores. They could actually feed on both the producer and the primary consumer. Like us, we eat some vegetables and we eat animals if you're not vegan or vegetarian. And the primary consumer helps keep a balance. It makes sure that the vegetation doesn't go out of control, because if it does go out of control, it could use up all the nutrients in the soil, and that kills off all the vegetation. It actually does happen. I'm not going to go too much into detail about it, but one of my interests is they predicted around about a population of 1.2 billion human beings that was going to be our downfall. So what we expected to see was our population to go exponentially up, and then we reached a 1.2 billion. I believe it was 1.2 billion. And then it was going to lead to our extinction. And this actually happens in areas that we monitor. We see that when it's not controlled and it goes out of control, what you have is all the vegetation goes and all die. So we thought that all of these human beings could lead to all the vegetation going and a range of other problems. But what actually happened was we discovered how to make fertilizers. I'm not going to go into detail, but we managed to use science to discover ways to go past that 1.2 billion barrier. So, even this day and age, they're saying, there's too many people on the earth, we're going to collapse, blah, blah, blah. But what tends to happen is science pushes that boundary further along. So we are able to survive. Next, what you have is the decomposers. So the decomposers are what breaks down the dead animals and the dead plants back into nutrients for the plants to absorb, pick back up, and actually flourish. So they're kind of like the recyclers. They're going to take everything that is dead. We don't want it to be laying about, break it down back into nutrients to get absorbed by the soil, and the soil then gives it to the plants, and then voila. Now, there's a lot of factors that will affect an ecosystem. Some of them are biological, some of them are not biological. We call it abiotic, which is not biological, and biotic, which is biological. I won't go too much into detail, but some of the things are the amount of sunlight, the oxygen levels, the carbon dioxide levels. And there's a wide range of things that we're going to focus. I'll do a separate video and I'll focus on. Now, obviously, pollution, habitat destruction is affecting ecosystems. A habitat is a specific place where organisms live. So when we talk about habitat, we're talking about the habitat for a squirrel, the habitat for an elephant. Where do these species actually live? And each habitat provides unique conditions, unique nutrients for that species to actually flourish in that specific area. That is why when climate change comes and kicks in, it disrupts the amount of vegetation there is. That makes that habitat no longer have resources needed to support that type of species anymore. And then these species tend to need to migrate. And then there is something known as population. Now, population is how many of a specific species. So when I say in a given area, so when I say what is the population of the human race, so it's how many humans are in Earth. Or I could say, what's the population of the humans in the UK? So I could give it, but I'm focusing on one species in a given area. Now, population sizes could go up and down. It depends on a range of other factors. And then there is a community. And a community is where all of these species interact with one another. Some of them are producing mutualistic beneficial relationships, so supporting one another. So, for example, you see these kind of feeding fish that feed on sharks, I believe. So sharks have maybe some parasites, things like that, and this feeding fish will eat up those parasites. That benefits the feeding fish. That also benefits the sharks, because then they won't have those parasites on their skin. So some relationships are mutualistic. Some of them are competitive. So, for example, a tuna fish might compete with a shark in eating the sardines. Now, we're going to go through this later on, but ecosystem's health is measured by its biodiversity. How many different species have you got? Because maybe climate change happens and one species gets affected, but at least you will have many different other species that will support that ecosystem. So when we look at judging an ecosystem's health, we want to see how many different species are in there. For example, the rainforest, I believe, has over 50% of the world's species, not the total population, but if you looked at all the different species in the earth, 50% of them could be found in the rainforest. It's considered a very biodiverse place because it has many different species. And also, there are cycles that we'll later go through. So if the number of predators goes up, the amount of prey goes down. If the amount of prey goes down, predators come down. If the predators come down, now the prey can reproduce very easily. So you're going to see like each one, you want it to be more of a stable environment. So there's not these great fluctuations. So here what we can see in this image is sunlight, and this is enabling the producers to actually photosynthesize. And you can see some of the habitats are the floating pondweed over here. And this allows it to actually capture the sunlight. You see something called plankton. Plankton are usually found in the bottom surface. They're not found really deep underneath the ocean because there's not much sunlight that reaches there. And they're found really mainly in the top area where the sunlight is about. And plankton is a organism, it's kind of that is able to photosynthesize, and this feeds other types of organisms that will feed on it. You also have rooted roots. The rooted roots make the plants stable, anchor them to the water so they don't get washed away. And also roots are able to hold the soil together so the soil doesn't go through erosion. Because the last thing you want to do is lose that top layer of soil where it's the most nutritious part of the soil that will support the plants. The bottom layers are not that nutritious, so you're going to lose that. It is like I teach marine science, but there's sometimes something known as upwelling, when the water comes downwards, pushes those nutrients that are found in the bottom of the ocean, brings it up, and then the plankton over here could actually blow up because now they're going to get the nutrients. And this cycle creates like different organisms are able to flourish because more plankton means more shrimp and so forth. And then you can see the snails over here. They found a habitat and they feed on the vegetation. You got the air over here. Some of the carbon dioxide diffuses into the water as well as oxygen. The photosynthesis is going to help the carbon dioxide will help the plankton to actually photosynthesize. The oxygen will help the organisms actually respire in the water. Also, the plankton is going to put oxygen into the water.